Down to Biscayne.
Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing rubber frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust.
You sound scared.
It's about have the guts, we're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome into 5 on the Floor live on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel, also the 5 Reasons podcast feeds. Make sure to like, subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, turn the notifications on. We'll try to get to some of the comments as we do this live, and then we will post it on the podcast feed afterwards. Today's floor plan, I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. I got Brady Hawk. You can follow me at Brady Hawk 305. I got Alex Toledo. You can follow me at Tropical Blanket. One of the weirder games of the year, and another loss in Detroit for the Miami Heat, who now fall to 13-11 on the season. These are the types of games we may remember later in the year when we're talking about seeding. The Heat fell way behind in this game, could not shut down the Detroit Pistons from the three-point line. We will get into that. And then they started to rally back with about 4 minutes left. And they completed that rally with the three-pointer by Tyler Hero, which we should not forget because there's going to be a lot of conversation about what happened at the end of the overtime. But Tyler, after struggling for most of the game, came on later in the game and ended up making the shot to send them to overtime. But then in the overtime, Hero missed a shot that ended up being the final shot for the Heat of the game. And I know that people are going to talk about why Jimmy Butler didn't end up getting that look. And also we will talk about why Jimmy Butler didn't get to the line when it appeared that he was fouled in a shooting situation towards the end of that game. And we will cover that one as well. But essentially, this was a high wire of a game because the Heat fell way behind, got back into the lead after in the overtime after tying it up. Actually took, I believe, an 8-point lead at one point, and Tyler had a three that could have put the thing away, missed it. Detroit looked like they'd quit on the thing defensively, and then all of a sudden Tim Hardaway Jr. went nuclear. He made 3 straight threes. The Heat stopped defending the line again, and a lot of mistakes down the stretch, and Jimmy, in what is his best game in a very long time, okay, and one of his best games in a Miami Heat uniform period, 12 of 21. We'll get to the player of the game stuff in a second. 35 points, 19 rebounds, and 10 assists, and they wasted it in Detroit. We'll get more into the player of the game stuff in a second, but let's start here, Brady, with your view of the end of that game.
There's a lot that went into it because this is one of those games that we're going to say the ending probably doesn't matter as much as the first 3.5 quarters. That's ultimately probably what lost them this game, and it really was the defense. Some specific players we could probably end up getting into. But at the end of the game, I mean, they had an 8-point lead there with about 2 or 3 minutes to go, and they just absolutely folded. And like you said, Tyler had the big shot that ultimately got them to that point. But this was a rough game from him. I mean, I think he would acknowledge that too. I mean, he just keeps putting up these three. They just were not falling. He was not getting these threes to fall. And he kept trying to shoot his way out of it because that's ultimately what he always does. And look what it did at the end of regulation. Like him shooting himself out of it got them to OT. But those were hard misses into Tim Hardaway Jr. threes every single time. And all of a sudden now you're trailing by 1 and you're trying to force your way back into this. And I mean, the last play is essentially, I know we're going to get to it more. I'm still a little confused about it because it felt like, I think everybody was talking about they thought the Heat were the bonus. Jimmy got fouled, ends up being another side out. They try to get it to Jimmy again. They cut it off. So obviously it goes to Tyler. And I think everybody, including me, is like, they need to get the ball to Jimmy there. They're down 1, find a way to get him the ball. But they had to inbound it to Tyler because they're going to get a 5-second violation. And then there's only 5 seconds. So it's like, Tyler, go create something. And we saw what happened there. It's just a kind of an ugly shot. So the ending of the game is just, it kind of sums up what we saw at the beginning of the game and for the first 3 quarters. But I think, look, there's just certain guys I think we could point to, and it's not like defensively, they cannot be giving up this many points to a Detroit team. Like the defense was just not there from the start. The thing that I'm going to hone in on which really is the big topic to me, is that when you have a 3-man bench unit core of Terry Rozier, Jaime Jaquez, and Kevin Love, and I can make the case that they all should have been pulled in the second half and they shouldn't have been in the rotation. Like, that's a problem. That's a problem for this team right now. You cannot really have that when you kind of design this whole roster and rotation around having Terry and Jaime specifically. Love is still that kind of outside piece. They're just working him in until Kalel gets ready, I guess. But Terry and Jaime were supposed to be the offensive punches. They were supposed to be the jolts offensively to kind of get you through games. And it feels like they're shooting themselves in the foot offensively when they come in. Terry, the inefficiency. Jaime just kind of seems out of it. Like, he just doesn't seem like he's in the same flow as he was last year, as we could, keep talking about. But it's becoming a problem because when Tyler and Duncan, when their starting backcourt is playing really well, it overshadows it and we don't get to it as much because when their guard plays playing really well, it's like, okay, that stuff's on the back burner. But when Tyler and Duncan have a rough night, when teams are pressuring them, it's a little bit clearer right now of what's going on in the kind of the bench unit. So there's a lot of things we could turn to. I know we could point fingers here, but that's just kind of what stood out to me.
All right, and I want to hold off on more of the Jimmy conversation until we get to player of the game. So I'll go to you, Alex, first before we get to that. We'll talk about the bench. I mean, you mentioned it that, you take a look at Jaquez, Rosier combined 8 of 20 from the field, 24 points. But again, really just rough stretches there. And they really didn't have a lot of other guys to go to. He's not going to play where, it's clear. And, the only other options, because he didn't have Jovic, he didn't have Larson. So the only other options would be Kashad Johnson or Alec Burks. So he doesn't seem inclined to play Alec Burks right now either. But let's again stay with the end of the game here a little bit, because it's unacceptable to give up 20 of 40 3-point shooting. I mean, it just is. Even in the modern NBA, that's just insane. If you look at the numbers here, Malik Beasley went 7 of 13. Tim Hardaway Jr. went 5 of 10. I mean, those two guys alone hit you with 12 threes. And it was, again, that bit them at the end of the game because they couldn't get out on Tim Hardaway Jr. They were late on the rotations. And people are asking again, why is Terry on the floor? Again, they didn't have, I don't know who else he could have gone to there. Drew fouled out. Okay. So he wasn't available at the very end there. But yeah, Rozier's not going to give them anything in defensively. Well, right. I guess he could have, right. He could have gone right. And Haywood, I don't think Haywood played particularly well tonight, but yes, I'm with you that he could have gone to it. But Alex, let's just get to the sequences because people are going to talk about them. They ran a beautiful play to get Hero that 3. At the end of the game. We had Jimmy and Tyler collaborating. Tyler was in rhythm. I didn't like some of Tyler's shots late in the game, though. And I know that, again, they cut it off with Jimmy there. But, I didn't like some of what I saw. He took too early in the shot clock. Look, I think there were 9 seconds left in the shot clock when you're trying to milk the clock. And then, again, that last one wasn't in rhythm at all.
Yeah, Tyler, like you guys had already spoken about, I think he had a rough game. And I knew he was going to turn up a little bit in the second half. It just took a while. It really took a while. And speaking of taking a while, like it was just, this game was so funky, right? In the sense of like the way that it was, where I think it was in the second quarter where it started to look like it was going to get out of hand, right? And then Jimmy just, puts the team on his back in such an exaggerated way where it's like, it's literally all him, right? So you get out of that. Right. And you think you're in the clear and then boom, they end up going down again. Right. And you do all this work to get into overtime. Tyler, even though it wasn't the same type of game, going down the stretch, hitting all those, crazy shots to send them to the overtime period. I was getting a little bit of deja vu. And so like it was so funky because of the way that it went. And it's like after all that, right. After all that work, just to throw it away with some questionable possessions, right? And I'm not blaming it all on Tyler because it's not like these were just god-awful shots. I just think that you got to be a little bit more solid, especially when you go up 8 in overtime, I believe it was, right? Like I think at that point, honestly, like people who are questioning why Jimmy didn't have the ball more in overtime, I think is valid. He is the guy who you go to in these types of situations when you have that cushion specifically, right? Not only because he's having a tremendous game, right? But not to get too much into Jimmy, but it's just like he is the guy you go to when you want to eat clock, right? Mm-hmm. And you just want to get up a shot at the end and get something there where you might get to the free throw line and make it an even better situation. Like I just think that was the guy to go to. No shade whatsoever to Tyler, who got you to that point, right? Like he was feeling it going into overtime. But yeah, I just think in hindsight, it's easy to look at it and say, it should have been a little bit more Jimmy, a little bit less Tyler. Terry had a shot there in overtime, I believe, that I didn't like as well. That was probably the one that stood out to me the most. I'm not even going to get into Terry. We've done that enough already. But, yeah, those are just kind of my thoughts from somehow how that went down the stretch there.
Yeah, and I know people are mentioning it here. Bam wasn't even a consideration, right? Like he really wasn't even a focal point in any way.
No,
down the
especially
stretch of this game
at that point.
No, right, and I mean, Bam finished 15 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists. All right, let's get to the player of the game stuff because we should talk about this in depth before we go much further.
And now it's time for the A Aggressive Insurance Player of the Night, sponsored by our friend Lynette. You can find her at insurancebylynette.com. That's with 2 N's and 2 T's, insurancebylynette.com. If you need car insurance, renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance, or any other type of insurance, she's the person to go to. Based in Lauderhill, she services the entire Tri-County area here in South Florida, and she will make sure to get you the best deal. She'll probably talk to you about the heat while you're at it. Reach out to her, insurancebylynette.com. And now, the player of the game.
Well, this one's fairly obvious. I know we could look at some players in Detroit who did damage tonight. Beasley with 28, Cunningham with 20, 11 rebounds, and 18 assists, by the way. 18 assists for Cade Cunningham. But it's Jimmy, and it's just unfortunate that they couldn't close it out. 12 of 21, I mentioned, 35 points, 19 rebounds, 10 assists. They know he's still capable of this on occasion. I know people are going to say, his trade value is the highest. The question the Heat have with him is, can he do this regularly? But they know that something like this is in him. Now, this is obviously his best statistical game of the year. It was his most impactful game. He nearly dragged them to the finish of this, with the exception of that hero shot at the end of regulation, pretty much by himself. Okay, Jimmy did this. But what was, we haven't seen this in a lot of games from Jimmy Brady. So what was different tonight?
The difference, it wasn't that we haven't seen this in a lot of games. It's we haven't seen it against a team like Detroit. Like he just doesn't get up for these games where you're on the road in a Charlotte or Detroit. And you just kind of know the Jimmy game you're going to get. It feels like on most occasions this was just totally a different feeling. And you kind of felt it in the first quarter. He came out and you could just feel how much more engaged he was on both ends. Like he was just playing really well. You could kind of tell with the shot profile that he's looking at, like not only just getting to the line, but like hard attacks. Like he was physical, taking bumps, finishing at the rim. Once he like has that mindset, he's going to play that shot profile. You kind of know the mode he's in. And then the 4 steals kind of is always the other indication of how he's playing on a certain night. He was playing incredible. It's just tough because you said that they feel it's kind of wondering if he can do this on a night-to-night basis. But the issue is if he's able to do it against a Detroit team and you still lose, it kind of shows where you're at with the rest of the roster at this current stage. That's not really a great indication. But he played really well. And it's just the other thing here is you kind of expected this. I will say on the flip side is that when you get the multiple days off every single time this guy comes out and plays like this, when you get 2 or 3 days off for him, you're in another situation here where they're going to be off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they play again Friday against OKC on a back-to-back. I'd probably expect a similar version because whenever he gets that extra burst, he always plays a little better. But I just thought the style of play stands out to me more than the numbers because when he plays like that, that was like, I don't want to say playoff Jimmy, but like his type of profile once he gets down to like in a first round of a playoff series, when he's like, okay, I'm going to start bulldozing. I'm going to mismatch hunt. I'm going to take contact. I'm going to finish at the rim and I'm going to defend. And it still wasn't good enough. He had good spurts there, but they cut it to 4. At halftime, and then the third quarter went, and they went away from Jimmy. Jimmy didn't have the ball in his hands in a good portion of that beginning of that third quarter, and everything went downhill from there, and they're down 17 all of a sudden. So it just feels like the 10 assists is a good indication, too, that it's always a better play style. But when they play through Jimmy, this team has shown that they're a better offensive team. When they start lingering away from him, and I don't know if that's a team thing or a Jimmy thing, if he's taking a break in the game or if it's matchup thing, like you kind of have to look into the portion of the game, but it's definitely a difference maker. I think this offense benefits when he's playing that version. He's playing on the ball.
Well, you mentioned the start of the third quarter. That was problematic. Was that a 9-0 run at the very beginning of it? They got off the bad starts in each of the first 3 quarters, actually, and then had to kind of find their way back into it. I know we got 3 days off now, and Jimmy's coming off this ridiculous game, and all the narratives are going to start again. they're all going to start again, because the topic is Jimmy right now, and then it's going to be, this is why you have to pay him. All the rest of this, I can tell you, I don't think one game here or there, elite like this, or a game against Charlotte where Jimmy didn't have it, didn't seem engaged. I don't think one game is going to affect the Heat one way or the other in terms of what they decide to do. I wouldn't read too much into that. I kind of know, when we've talked about it, where they stand as far as this goes. They want to let the season play out and then see what Jimmy does after the year, whether he opts in or opts out, and if he needs their help with a sign and trade, or what direction he decides to go. But it is going to get attention over the next couple of days, because there's going to be a lot of talk about, okay, there's teams in the league that could use a guy like this, and we're going to start to hear some of that noise again. But something Brady said there, Alex, I want to go to you on, because he said the offense is better when it goes through Jimmy. But the whole point of the start of the season was this pivot to Tyler, to playing a different style, layups and threes. Obviously, Jimmy does a lot of his work near the basket also, but he does a lot of work in the mid-range too. Are we still at a point where this team is better when the offense goes through Jimmy?
Absolutely. That wasn't really ever in question for me. I think he's been their best player, right, throughout this whole time. That's obviously not a hot take, but even throughout this stretch where Tyler's been awesome, right, and has taken this kind of leap where he's playing the best ball of his career and all that, I still think that's great, and they've needed that, right? I give him a ton of credit. That's awesome. I still think, like, when you've seen what Jimmy has done, right, at the highest levels and done it multiple times, like, that's still, that precedent is still there, even if you think he's declined some since, whatever you think his peak is in this Heat tenure. Like, he's shown you plenty of times this season, right? Not necessarily every night, but plenty of times this season he's giving you pretty good games. And I think, has had a pretty strong regular season relative to, like, expectations, right? I don't think like, he's shown you he can still do this. He can get to the free throw line at will, can still mismatch hunt at will whenever he wants to. It was just about how much do you need to go to that. And I think that's some of the stuff you mentioned has continued, right? Like the shot profile stuff with Tyler, he's continued to play it in that way. And I think it's a theme throughout the team as well, because you don't see quite as many mid-rangers whatsoever, right? Like, compared to what you saw last season as a team, right? But Jimmy is still his own offense, and I think he is still their best offense outside of, like, what Tyler has done this year, and outside of Duncan Bam, like, two-man game. I think I would still put Jimmy, like, in a situation where if I'm Spo, right, as a couch coach, by the way, that was a banger by him when he mentioned that shoot around today. If you guys didn't check that out, go check that out. But as a representative of couch coaches everywhere, yeah, I still think Jimmy is their best offense. Like, he gets you to the paint, he gets you to the free throw line, he draws too better than everybody still. And that's no shade whatsoever to Tyler. Tyler's been awesome. I just think, like, how much do you got to go to it, right? Like, we're at this point already where you need like a hefty dose of it on a night-to-night basis, because then that's a problem, right? I think that's partly the consequence of what's happened with guys like Terry and Jaime to a lesser extent. They've both been disappointing. I think, Terry, it's, again, not to get into him, but, like, the offense that you were expecting from Jaime and Terry on a night-to-night basis, you're so far away from that, at least in my opinion. And I think because of that, it's like you need Jimmy to kind of make up for some of those extra buckets, especially on a night like tonight where Tyler got going late, but just didn't really have it for the first, I don't know, like 2.5 quarters, I would say. I don't remember when it was that he started, probably more than that. But, I just think we're back to this point. It feels like we're kind of back to square one. Like, there's some good process stuff, but as far as, like, all the shot creation that you were supposed to have, it's not as expected. So it feels like you're kind of going back to square one in offense, go back to the things that work, go back to the defensive identity, screw everything else. The only thing that's really, like, stayed true is the shot profile stuff. They really, tried to keep going with that.
All right, I want to go to the play of the day in a second here, but I want to throw this out before we do, and let's do this quickly here, because I'm seeing a lot of this in the comments. I mean, they understand what's going on with Terry right now. Like, they're not blind to it. Okay, they're even, I know that the majority of the front office wanted to make that trade. There was a little bit of sort of dissent at the time, and I know that even those who wanted to make the trade now look at the dissent and say, maybe that that position was correct. Okay. And I think we've even mea culpa'd here. I know I have, Greg has, in terms of the trade and what we thought of it at the time and how it's worked out. I don't know really what they do now with it, because what they put Terry on the bench. They took him out of the role that he was in before. They can't tank his trade value completely. So like if you shelve him, you take him out of the rotation, that is a concern. They don't have a lot of other options. Like what are they going to, they already put Drew in the rotation, right? Larson's not healthy right now. Hawkins is not playing well. So that was supposed to be your other sort of scorer off the bench. If he ended up on the bench, they don't have Jovic night tonight. So that we don't even know what his role is at this stage. So it kind of feels like Brady, like, what do? They just cut his minutes more? Like, I don't think Spo wanted to necessarily play him late, but he did.
Well, you started by saying if they shelve him, they're going to tank his trade value, but I don't think necessarily playing him right now is helping his trade value either. So the rotation thing is another discussion, because I think that is honestly a possibility. But when you talk about going another option, I mean, I don't really know why that lineup is closing in overtime. And I know they had an 8-point lead, and if all things go well there, then we're not talking about it. But, well, they did blow the game. So, I mean, if you're running a lineup of Terry, Tyler, Duncan, Jimmy at the 4 with Bam, and everything goes south from an 8-point lead on, I mean, that's a problem. And Terry is not obviously a defensive stopper on the other end, and they're a little bit lengthier, and he's not creating offensively. I just don't know why he's out there in that point in the game. So that's number one. I think you could definitely see a cutting minutes. I honestly think, first of all, if Drew, I will say that if Drew didn't have 6 fouls, he would have been closing there, I think 100%. Right. I still think you could have went to like a Haywood type just to go a little bigger. But I honestly, I looked at a big picture when they were really down, and obviously they made the comeback. But like on a night where Terry and Jaime and Love are playing like that, in the second half, I'd almost come out and say Burks, Keyshawn Johnson, Khalil Ware get in the game. Like I just think if they're like playing that poorly at that point in the game, and you get your stint, like you go to your next people and try to find a spark. Why not try to, especially a game against Detroit? Like I just don't know why you don't go to a Burks type or some of your young guys to see what's there when you know what's going to happen after what happened in the first half. So that's a completely other story. I don't think this in terms of the context of this game, because also if Pella's playing and these other guys and Jovic is playing, I think it's even easier to do that. It's a little bit tougher with the roster, but there's still ways they could do it. So, I think there's some tough decisions they're going to have to make, because you said like the trade value part, but it's also Spo evaluating this on a game-to-game basis of what he feels is their best chance to win a basketball game on a specific night. And there's some cases to be made against certain matchups that Terry's not in that grouping right now. He's just not playing good basketball. So, it's tough. They're gonna have to make some decisions here coming up. And look, every time they have a bunch of days off, it's usually when they make their decisions. So we'll see what happens. I
just don't know what the decision is in this case. We all identified the decision they needed to make early in the year: get Terry out of the starting lineup. It was clear it wasn't working. The experiment and then change the starting lineup, and that has for the most part worked. I mean, they had the best net rating in the league with that lineup.
I think you get a good poll out of this, actually. Like, if
what's that?
I know you like to do the polls on Twitter,
yes.
Ethan. I think you could do something with like, what do you do with Terry? Like at this point where he stands, do you give him a little bit more usage, try to see if he gets more confident, right? Like, do you?
I'm gonna vote against that. I'll tell you.
He's already been like. You know what I mean? He's already been completely almost discontinued in the offense, right? Like he was thrown in there tonight as a closer, had a much better second half than first half. But as far as his usage, like it's so down. So they've already kind of gone down with it. So there's option one, right? Like give him a little bit more usage, see if he's still got something in the tank. Option two, cut your losses, get him out of the rotation, play Larson when he's back or somebody else, right? Insert name here. And then option three, just kind of keep him in where he's at right now, just kind of this purgatory role where you barely notice him out there a lot of times, and it just feels like you're trying to like play the middle there, but I just don't see why.
I mean, if a guy keeps crashing,
what's he out there for?
Okay, but if a guy keeps crashing a car, you don't then just say, "Hey, we're going to flip you the keys to a Lamborghini," and go out there and
I didn't say that was my choice. My choice would be Larson over him.
Right, I think that's the direction that needs to go in. All right, let's do the play of the day. I don't know which one to choose, but I'll let you guys figure that out.
And now it's time for the X-Ray of the Play of the Day, brought to us by our friends over at Mobile C-Arm and Staffing Services. Nelson and his team will bring the X-ray equipment and the staffing to you. If you work in a hospital or a medical office, get a consultation today at c-armandstaffing.com or give them a call at 561-891-9620. Their fleet of trucks at your service. Again, it's Mobile C-Arm and Staffing Services, 561-891-9620. And now, the X-Ray of the Play of the Day.
All right, well, there are like three plays we could look at. There are a lot of plays in this game, but there are three plays we could look at the most. One was Hero getting that three, which I thought was, again, beautiful design by Spo in that case at the end of overtime. And Jimmy, that's a play where they collaborated. Like, if they closed this thing in overtime like they should have, we would be celebrating what happened at the end of regulation. Okay, then there's the Hero three at the end where they say they cut off the lane to Jimmy. Tyler takes the bad three. I want to focus back on this because, Brady, I still don't understand what happens. Does anything come up on Twitter? Why was Jimmy not at the line there? Why was that side out of bounds? I don't understand. He went up, he got a rebound, right? He was going up for a putback. Is that not a shooting foul? Did I miss something?
They definitely called it on the floor. That's all I know. Like that was 100% the case. They called it after the rebound. The only thing I could think of is that the TV was wrong and they weren't in the bonus, unless somebody knows if they were in the bonus completely or not. That's my only take on it. So it was a weird situation. I'll say this, though, because you were talking about the play of the game. The Tyler three was a really nice drop. Like, they flared Duncan's screen off for Tyler. It wasn't there. Tyler curls back, reverses it. Jimmy handoff for Tyler. Tyler makes it. They almost seem – everybody complains about the threes that they've taken over the years late in games. But is it just me, or do they seem like they're more comfortable when they have to drop a three? Like, I feel like their best of designs always come when it's like that. Whenever it's going toward the basket or it's trying to get it to you're putting obviously the refs in a position to call a foul. I'd like the first one. I would rather of them if they could have got Jimmy free, run that for Jimmy to go to the basket. But I'll just say, like, on that design specifically, it does feel like they drop some pretty decent threes when it's not in isolation like it ended up being for that last one for Tyler. So, I mean, the first one was a really nice shot. I mean, the game is definitely a different game if they call that foul for Jimmy. I mean, by the way, risky pass. I mean, that wasn't a clean Jimmy backdoor for a layup. That was a lob over the top, and Jimmy had to make a tough catch, which he's good at. But there was a lot of things that could have went wrong on that play, and then obviously we know what happened after.
Daniel Webster makes the comment here. They had only one team foul at the time, Duran on Bam during the jump ball. Okay, so that explains that part of it. I still thought I still don't know why they called it on the floor, but I'll have to review it to Steve because I thought Jimmy gathered and was going up, but maybe I saw it wrong. So I'll take a look at it afterwards. All right, let's do defending the house. And I want to.
There's usually so many stoppages. Like the NBA usually has no problem stopping the game over and over and over. And now is when they decided to just kind of let everything just happen.
Here's the question: Did Spo use his challenge? Because we talked about like 3 times during the game where he could. I don't even know if they can challenge that call at the end there. Can they even challenge that? Is that a judgment call that they can challenge, whether it's a foul on the floor or not?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Something I'll figure out before tomorrow's pod. I'll check in. I'll check in on that. All right, let's do defending the house. Then I want to have a final thought on Jimmy. I want to get to.
And now it's time for our Defending the House segment, sponsored by our friends over at The Real Estate Shop. You can find them at realestateshopfl.com. That's with 2 P's and an E, realestateshopfl.com, or at the Fort Lauderdale Realtor on Instagram. This is Javier Iglesias and Amanda Martin. They help buyers and sellers in real estate. They're nimble and protective of their clients. They service the entire Tri-County area. That's Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties with a proven on-market strategy. The Real Estate Shop sellers earn the most money in the shortest time frame because Amanda and Javier have a deep understanding of the local market. So check them out. Again, it's at the Fort Lauderdale Realtor on Instagram, realestateshopfl.com, or give them a call at 954-268-9812. And now, who defended the house?
All right. Well, the Heat didn't. So let's. I just want an explanation here. Why was everybody? Either of you can handle this. Why was everybody so open early in the game from 3? Why did this happen? Where I mean, at one point they had like a 24-point deficit at the 3-point line between what they were producing, what Detroit was producing. It was amazing they got back in the game at all, considering that. Why all the breakdowns tonight?
I don't
Alex,
know about the why.
I'll let you say this, but before I'll say it, we always talk about this at the games when the star player they play against, and we talk about their assist lines, and almost
Over
every
on
time the
assists.
star, yeah, and you see that case with Cade tonight, and Cade got going early in the game, but before you want to go, I just wanted to point that out and say like they were doubling him, and then all of a sudden the kickouts were there, and and they shot 20 for 40 from three off of that.
No, and it was that was something I was going to mention earlier, and completely forgot to throw in when I was rambling earlier, as I typically do. But is that the 20 of 40, right? Like that's the biggest stat from this game, right? But it's the way that they got to it. Like you mentioned, there was breakdowns early on. There was sloppy, inconsistent defense. It wasn't terrible the whole game. It wasn't one of those, but there was just like a lot of stretches of poor defense that I think it's the game started that way. Like you mentioned, there was just guys getting into the paint, specifically Cade. And then you've got high value, wide open threes being created for guys like Hardaway and Beasley, who, for all their flaws, here, known to give up threes, but it's like they're wide open threes as opposed to open threes. But are we getting the helicopter thing? What's
yeah, well, it's not even a helicopter. I'm not sure what it is, but somebody has intercepted your message here, so we'll close it there.
Oh,
we got enough. We got enough. It's quite all right. It's no problem. It's just like the Heat. You just sputtered out in overtime. That's all.
My point was they never really cooled off. The Pistons never really cooled off from three. You gave them way too many easy looks, and they started feeling themselves. That's what it all really comes down to. It's hard to. And the Heat shot like 28% from three. Like that's a huge gap. Not only that, you really got a lot of steals, and it was all for nothing. They still outplayed you in transition.
You're really pressing your luck here because it's going to go off at any time. Anyway, we got it. We heard you. We got the of everything that happened there. Okay, I want to close with a thought on Jimmy because this is going to be 3 days of this. We know what's going to happen here. If there's any national narrative that's built off of this, it's that the Heat need Jimmy to play at a certain level. They need Jimmy going forward, and even when he plays at a certain level against Detroit, they don't have enough, and they haven't got enough help. And I'm not arguing against some of those narratives, which I know are out there. But I'm just going to say this. I don't think tonight and his brilliant performance, which it was, this is a throwback Jimmy Butler Miami Heat performance. This is one of his better regular season games with the Heat, to be honest. These games he usually reserved for the playoffs. I don't think it changes the general equation. I'm just going to say that. The Heat know he's capable of this at times. In fact, it's kind of their point. This is kind of what Pat was getting at the end of last season. Like, we just want to see Jimmy be more available and more focused on a more consistent basis. Then the question becomes, okay, what is that worth to them? And if he does it. So I think if he was just string a series of these games together, I do think it might change the equation somewhat. But I still think we're heading for the same thing that I've said all along, which in talking to a lot of people is what I've come to and what others covering the team have come to, is that the Heat are prepared to take the situation with Jimmy into the offseason. And if he opts out, they'll deal with it then. That's still where I think things are. But they want to, if he was doing this all the time, like last year and this year, like there wouldn't have been a question about the extension. But again, this is not something that 35-year-olds typically are able to do. He would be going counter to pretty much a lot of years of NBA history, with the exception of like LeBron. So again, it's a great performance by Jimmy. We should celebrate the performance. We bemoan the Heat's loss here because this was one that absolutely got away and could cost them down the road. They have serious issues with the bench right now. I think it's clear, and we'll talk about it more over the next 3 days. And it's great that Jimmy can still do this. I wouldn't go too far to say, okay, now they're all of a sudden they're going to give him an extension if he does this one more time or two more times. This would have to be like a string of these. And if they're still losing those games, there are even bigger problems than we thought. We'll do podcasts about other options that they have with Jimmy, one of which could be just spreading the money out over more years, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. That's a tease. We might do that one tomorrow. All right.
Discord.
Thanks to Alex. Thanks to Alex. Thanks to Brady. Subscribe to Off the Floor. God, that was a shitty loss. Have a good night, everybody.